man who I met some time ago as to when he entered the Bioethics Honors Program, and he carried a smile and he carried a humility and he also carried a genius, but his genius did not go beyond his humility. I just loved it about him. So when he come to my office, we could we could sit and talk for hours. So Jalen Spain, it was interesting when we were thinking about a new president for this year. The president at that time, Nina Hilton, who was a marvelous president, she called me. She said, "Who are you thinking about?" She said, "I think Jalen Spain will be good," and that's the name that I had, Jalen Spain. So we thank God for his parents, for his family, and for shaping him into the young man that he is. He's a junior at Tuskegee University, where he is majoring in biology while minoring in the field of chemistry on the pre-med track. His regard to pursue medicine stems from a passion from the field of study relating to the complexity of disease and a genuine intrigue to better understand human health. His ultimate career goal is to become established as a surgeon engrossed in a specialty that he is unsure about at the moment. Aspiring to obtain such a high position of leadership, Jalen embodies the tenacity, the goal orientation, and the knowledge to be a successful leader, exemplified in this campus involvement. Jalen is the president. He was the past president of the sophomore class Student Government Association, and he's the president of the Bioethics Honors Program. He maintains a 4.0 GPA, and he also works as the head as a general chemistry tutor in the campus tutoring facility. Um, Although he has a 4.0, that doesn't go to his head. Actually, he uses his head to get there. but, but I'm telling you, this is a quality young man. And Jalen, if I sound effusive and not to embarrass you, is to just let you know I love you and I love working with you. You're just a good brother, and we just love that about you. Dr. Warren and I talk about you behind your back because he's up there, and I'm climbing up there. And if ever I need a doctor, Jalen, you have full permission to cut me open and do whatever because I know you. All right. So give to you, Mr. Jalen Spain, the president of the Bioethics Honors Program, and he will introduce our speakers for today. So you introduce first, Dr. Riggins Earl.
Thank you, Dr. Hodge, for the great introduction. I truly appreciate it. And everything that you said is reciprocated. I truly appreciate it. You all can hear me, correct?
Yes. Uh-huh.
Great. I'll begin by introducing Dr. Riggins Earl. Dr. Riggins Earl is a professor of ethics and theology at the Interdimensional Theological Center of the Atlanta University Center, where has served for 30 plus years. He holds the Ph.D. degree from Vanderbilt University in social ethics. He has done postdoctoral studies at Harvard and Boston University, respectively. Earl has done research at the London Institute for African Studies, taught in the Religious Studies Department of the University of Tennessee at Knoxville, and taught religion in the university and seminary context for 40 years. During that tenure, he has sought to be at the forefront of intellectual conversations about religion and the ethical and moral life, particularly as it relates to Black Americans. Besides his numerous articles in print, Earl has published two major volumes on the subject of Black religion and ethics: Dark Symbols, Obscure Signs, God, Self, and Community in the Slave Mind, 1993. Dark Salutations, Greetings, Ritual, and God in Black America, 2001. Earl's work has earned him several national research awards, the most recent of which was the Lilly Professor Research Fellowship for the academic year of 2001 to 2002, sponsored through the Association of Theological Schools. In November 2007 and in 2009 to 2010, Earl was appointed by the Tuskegee University as a visiting senior scholar at the National Bioethics Center. He published the following articles from this research and study: the USPHS Syphilis Study at Tuskegee, Rethinking the Horizon of Beneficence in the Research for the Legacy of the USPHS Syphilis Study at Tuskegee, edited by Ralph V. Katz and Reuben Warren. Lanham, Maryland, Lexington Books, 2011. Sankofa Socioethic Reflections, the Tuskegee University National Bioethics Center's Decade of Operations, 1999 to 2009. In Journal of Healthcare for the Poor and Underserved, Volume 21, Number 3, Supplement Baltimore, Johns Hopkins Press, August 2010. The American Constitution, Its Troubling Religious and Ethical Paradox for Blacks in Ethics That Matter, African, Caribbean, and African American Sources, edited by Marcia Y. Riggs and James Samuel Logan. Minneapolis Fortress, Press 2012, Black Theology and Human Purpose, and the Cambridge Companion to Black Theology, Cambridge Companion to Religion, edited by Dwight Hopkins and Edward Antonio, Cambridge University Press, 2012. Earl is presently writing an article on breaking interfaith sound barriers, Louis Armstrong's creative jazz response to Judaism, Catholicism, and Protestantism, and A Commoner's Uncommon Life of Ministry, pastor of Johnny Flakes Jr., 1934 to 2013. Earl is presently writing the following book manuscripts: Noam and Jalid, The Ethics of Complicity in the Tuskegee Syphilis Study, and The Jesus Christ in Black Consciousness, The Theological and Ethical Dilemma. Professor Earl has ordained Christian clergy, Baptist, advocates teaching and preaching the gospel to meet the needs of the whole person. He does this by building communication bridges between the Black churches and the academy. From July 2011 to August 2012, Earl served as intern pastor in the Bellevue Baptist Church in Vine City, Atlanta, Georgia. During this period, he launched a weekly Wednesday noonday Bible study service where better than 200 homeless people were taught and fed at some weekday sessions. Earl has formerly pastored for more than 20 plus years at churches in Shelbyville, Tennessee, specifically, and the Knoxville, Tennessee suburban areas of Aloka, Alcoa, and Louisville, respectively. Professor Earl is seriously committed to the teaching and preaching of the Christian gospel locally, nationally, and internationally. For a 10-year tenure, Earl taught during the summers in Vision Quest, an ethical leadership academy for youth in cities such as Atlanta, Detroit, and Rochester. He has done volunteer work at the Lindsay Street Baptist Church in Atlanta, conducting Bible classes for ex-felons. Professor Earl is married to Natasha N. Kobe Earl. Riggins was married to the late Loveleen Thornton Earl, with whom he fathered two sons and one daughter. Earl is the grandfather of two grandsons, Nathan and Caden Earl. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome Dr. Riggins Earl.
Dr. Earl, we're not hearing you. Can you hear me? We're getting feedback, but no audio.
Hello.
Yes. Okay.
All right. Sorry. Mr. Spain, thank you so much. Thank you for the presentation. Dr. Warren, Dr. Hodge, and Mr. Spain, thank you so much. Let me, out of the depth of my heart, thank Attorney Gray for that marvelous presentation, um, and for helping us for giving us a first-hand view of what it meant in that time period, to do the kind of work that he did, and perhaps uh, he probably just gave us a bird's eye view of what he really went through in being the counselor for providing counsel for these men. It sounds like risky business to me, and some of you raised the question about his, his fear or his his disposition on what he was experiencing. But I was assigned to talk to you about ethics and vulnerability, voting rights, equity, and equality. Dr. Warren mentioned that I have some firsthand knowledge of those records. Before I get into my topic, let me just say a word about what Dr. Warren said, that I have some experience about the records, medical records of those men, and they are in the Southeast National Archives. They used to be here in the city of Atlanta. They were moved to Jonesboro, uh, Georgia, which is right below the airport, and it's a brand new facility down there, probably not more than 20 years old. Um, that where they house these records. I guess the CDC turned those records over to the archives. Dr. Hodge went down there with me on one occasion where we spent the whole day. I've spent many days and even weeks down there and gathering the data for a book on the ethics of the Tuskegee study. And of course, um, my prayer is that I live to finish that project, and so the public can consume it. The records are Those medical records are open to the public. I think, but you do have to, I guess, give some kind of account as to whether or not you're doing research and why, for what purpose are you doing that research. But Attorney Gray said that they have the pictures of these men, but they don't know who they are. And that really struck me in terms of what, and Dr. Hodge, I'm sure, can appreciate this, of what you struggle with when you go through those records. They are thousands of those records, as a matter of fact, because there are many records on one patient. And what's very sobering to me is they've been declassified. So there's a lot of things in there that they're not, when you see them put those black marks through sentences, or they black out a word or whatever, or black out a sentence, then it's very evident that they didn't intend for you to get that information. But it says a lot about what our fragility, our vulnerability as citizens in light of professional knowledge. Professional and technical knowledge leaves the citizen, the ordinary citizen, vulnerable. We have no way of controlling that. And totally. But when Attorney Gray was talking, one of the things that came to my mind is that that's why we need a bioethics center, because we need um, ethics is really the challenge of our discourses. It challenges the moral presuppositions and of the discourse, and the center becomes a place where we can decode specialists in other fields. In this instance, in the health field, there was no ethics center when those studies were done, starting in 1938. And now we are blessed with a center um, that can hire people to to do that. And it seems to me that that doesn't mean that we need to hire scientists to monitor, always hire scientists to monitor scientists, because they might not be the ones that really are interested in monitoring each other. And it seems to me that that's where the ethicist comes in, because the ethicist is the critical ethicist needs to be concerned, or the technically trained ethicist ought to be concerned about the ethical presuppositions of the one with specialized knowledge, especially for what purpose, or questioning the purpose that the knowledge is being used. Socrates, the classical philosopher, said in Plato's Republic that the one who has the technical training is the one who makes the best criminal. So if you need a bank robber, you don't. The best bank robber is the one who's trained to be a banker, and the best the position, if you need one to do damage, murder, it's not the one who carries the gun. It's the one who has the knowledge of the body, the technical knowledge of the body, to put the patient to sleep forever. So that's the way I understand ethics, in terms of the vulnerability of humankind in the nexus of human relationships. And in this case today, you've asked me to talk about the voting ethics and vulnerability, voting rights, equity, and equality. Very fascinating subject, because we are dealing with, in terms of voting rights, we are dealing with the definition of the voter as citizen. In other words, in what way is the citizen vulnerable to the way power is shared in the society? Now that's what makes it ethical, because you see, you're dealing with what what we call in ethics distributive justice. So the individual who votes is, and especially when we vote as groups in a democratic society, what we are sharing power. That's the presupposition. That's the kind of thing that the Enlightenment figures and the founders of this country were struggling with. And that's why they had no patience or no appetite for a theocracy. Because the theocracy says that power is not distributed, but power is distributed to all people. And the way let me finish this. There's not distributed to all people, but power is, sacred power is in the king. That's why it's theocratic. God made the king sacred, and therefore the king has the power and the right to control and decide for the masses, for the people. The king says what is right, and we got a sampling of that in 45, didn't we? At least he got it all screwed up. he thought well, he didn't, maybe he didn't get it screwed up, because remember what he said? He said he's the best thing for this country since Jesus Christ. So he did, he has some notion, maybe it's an elementary notion of theocracy, or it's a, let's say it's a twisted notion, misconstrued notion, right? He has some idea, maybe an inkling. He's not astute enough to read and catch up on what he doesn't know. And maybe that's a blessing, because I've often thought, if he were a real astute person, he would have sure enough been dangerous in the position as president. But he's very limited, and maybe that was in our favor. So let me get back now to the sacred, the way power is distributed in terms of individualism, and why this country, in operating under democratic presuppositions of the rights of all individuals, that this country has been so fanatical about that. We saw this play out in the election of the president. And I want to share with you a little bit of because we got three words here. Well, it's more than three. We got about 4 or 6 terms here that we want to struggle with. One is ethics. The other is vulnerability, voting rights, equity, and equality. How many of you watched you don't have to hold up your hands, because I realize we're limited here with this technology. But how many of you the watched the analyst make the analyses of the election? That was the most fascinating, other than Biden winning and Harris winning, the most fascinating aspect of the election to me was the the electoral maps, and the way the analysts read those maps in terms of blue and red. And the reason this was so fascinating to me is, will probably surprise you, it made me feel so damn vulnerable. I was never, and why did it make me feel so vulnerable? It helped me to see that Riggins Earl, who is a citizen of these United States, who exercises the right to vote, while I think that vote is powerful, and I believe that it is, when the map is placed, when it's mapped out there, and I see the red and blue, I feel so vulnerable and so helpless, because I can only my one vote counts. I'm not able to go back and vote again. I'm not able to increase the value of my vote, because there's something in my ego that would make me want to vote, and my vote out subject my vote dominates the votes of others. And then it's in dealing with that I had such reverence of an appreciation for what the founders were struggling with about one person, one vote. That my vote is so powerful, and yet it is so limited. Now, my vote is powerful when it is connected with people of my voting interest. It's not powerful. It seems so vulnerable and so weak when it goes up against the people who are the enemies of people who look like me. and who vote against my and my people's ethnic interest. And when I looked at I was, in Georgia, I found myself in Fulton County. I found myself saying that, oh, there's my vote. And yet I couldn't see it. I could only see the block of blue, right? But I was fascinated with the fact that the block of blue is expanding and growing in size and pushing back the red block. So that really helped me to see and struggle with it struggled with ethics and vulnerability. That how vulnerable I am, you are, we are as voters, and yet, according to the Constitution and according to the founders of the Constitution, the we are we only have one vote. But when we vote as a group, we are we become a unified we become unified, and that vote, that blue dominates and make pushes back and makes space for us in the map, which for me becomes the symbol of democracy. Um, I hope that illustration has helped, because my other point of vulnerability is, and I'm going to a philosophical understanding of vulnerability now, and that is that I am a voter, a citizen who is limited by time and space, and I'm vulnerable to space. I'm vulnerable to time. And I have so little time to fight for justice, to fight for assuring that people have the right to share, have the right to exercise their convictions about this democracy, about this country that's built, excuse me, that's built on the principles of democracy. Um, that that vulnerability issue is one that I think the black community needs to struggle more with. Why? The reason being that our religion teaches us that our vulnerability is a sign of our strength as a people, collectively as a people, and as individuals. And the way we struggle, the way we uh, speak about that is to say that, well, you baby, all black people are vulnerable, and we haven't had power to share, and we have so little power in this society that when our votes do come in, whether they're coming in from Philadelphia, whether they're coming in from Fulton County in Atlanta or DeKalb County in Georgia, it is, we start we start worshiping, and we'll say, thank you, Jesus. Oh, Lord, have mercy. Woo! Thank you, Lord. Thank you. I would challenge you. I would like to know whether that is, well, I can almost tell you whether is it the response of the white power elite? Generally, it isn't. They don't use that language to talk about the their votes and the power of the vote. So it's therapeutic for us. It's necessary for us to thank God. We probably worshiped more on last Tuesday Wednesday, Thursday, Friday into Saturday than most black people have worshiped the whole doggone year. We were just happy. Jesus Christ. There is a place for that. There's a therapeutic place for that status of vulnerability. Now the danger is that it's what Dr. Hodge, my friend and colleague, points out to us, and that is that vulnerability. There is a thin line, and I might not be stating it the way he states it, but I think my paraphrasing of it gets at the idea. There's a thin line between vulnerability and gullibility. And I thought about that during when we last week worshiping and praising God for the victory. It seems to me that somewhere in our community we have got to move to the intellectual challenge of training and working with let me back up and state it this way. Our history, we really gave this country through my brother and colleague John Lewis and people like John Lewis and C.T. Vivian and the whole civil rights movement. We gave this country a lesson in a clinic in the struggle for social justice and voting rights. When the history is written of America, and I've gone through the literature, and they're just um, unbelievable articles and books that have been published on the subject. But when it's written about America and democracy, the historians, the revisionist historians, will have to acknowledge that Black America has provided the saving ingredient for American democracy. Because American democracy, all democratic forms of government are very vulnerable, as you know, and as the literature suggests. But what has the amazing thing about American history is that the very people that this country denied the right to vote are the people who have come, and they did it in this last election marvelously. The black people who have come to the forefront of this country's historical drama. And it's black people who are calling for the saving of the soul of this nation, more so than powerful whites. That's all. That's which means that we are, to use a biblical metaphor, we have become the salt of America. And the salt has not lost its savor. It started with the civil rights movement with Martin King Jr. and SCLC, Southern Christian Leadership Conference, who argued that we have to save the soul of America. We have become the people. We want it. It is almost as though, and you saw it in our voting, it is almost as though we want to save white America more than an excessive number of white Americans want to save themselves and this country. I want you to talk to me about it. I want you to. I wish we were in person so we could give back and forth, and I could see could feel your energy. But that's where we are, And I know my time is getting short here. I think I started, Dr. Hodge, I started at what time? 4:30? What time did I start? Oh, he has that. He's cut it off.
You have about 3 more minutes, and then
About
we.
3 more minutes. Okay. All right. Well, I've said enough. What I realize is that you can only that mortality. That's what makes us vulnerable. We can only give so much of an output in so many minutes. You can only do so much because we are time bound creatures and we're space bound creatures, and we are. I would hope that in the question and answer section, we would struggle with this idea of distributive justice. If every individual is a king, and that's really what the founders of the country were arguing, uh, that every individual is a king, which every individual is sacred, that there's no one individual that has all the power. We all, what voting, the suffrage idea of suffrage means that each individual has a little power, kingly power, and we share this and we put all of it together and then we vote for the interests of the group and for the general will of the republic or the general will of the voting um, or the those um, in the democratic order. Yes, that's it. But let me go ahead and recognize and honor the time uh, constraints and say to you that I'm just getting warmed up and I'm feeling good about it and I'm ready to chew the fat on it and really hear you go back and forth with it because I think it's something that we as a bioethics center, and I'm so glad you all picked the topic. We need to talk about because bioethics centers have to be funded. They need big money, and Tuskegee doesn't have the kind of black people who have. They have black people. We have black people who have money, but they don't. They haven't come. We have to help them to get to the point to understanding that we need to fund more than automobile companies and more than beauty parlors and all of that. But I'm talking about the multimillionaires and the filthy rich black people who could help us to fund these kinds of queer institutions that enlighten us not only on the fragility, the vulnerability of our knowledge, but also enlighten us on the collective power of our knowledge. Thank you so much. God bless your bones.
Dr. Earl, you have quite a bit more time to expound on these matters after we have about an hour after Dr. Thiam presents. Okay, so Mr. President, is the show is yours.
Give me 1 second to get to the. Who is next up again? I'm sorry.
Dr. Thiam.
You're breaking up a little bit. You said it again?
Dr. Thiam. Thierno Thiam.
Okay. I can't look at the biography, but give me 1 second.
I could share the screen and you could do it that way.
Yeah, can you please? I can't find it.
Okay. All right, there it is.
Thank you. Dr. I don't want to mispronounce your name. Is it Thierno? Thierno?
Cherno.
Cherno. Okay, thank you. Dr. Thierno Thiam is chair of the Department of History and Political Science and the co-director of the Integrative Public Policy and Development Ph.D. program. He is also an associate professor for political science and international relations. Dr. Thierno Thiam joined Tuskegee University in December 2010 from the Institute for State Effectiveness, ISE, based in Washington, D.C. The ISE blends conceptual thought, analysis, and direct experience to rethink relations between citizens, states, and markets in the globalized world. At the Institute for State Effectiveness, Dr. Thiam was in charge of the report that detailed Wanda institutional transformation. Dr. Thiam's work has been featured in various outlets, including the Palgrave Macmillan Speakers Series, Spring Nature, the Council on Foreign Relations, the United Nations, as well as various US and international news outlets. Additionally, he has lectured extensively across Africa, Asia, Latin America, the US, and Europe. He is the author of 3 books and variety of articles. Dr. Thiam's academic activities span across several major universities, including Howard University, where he taught the graduate seminar in comparative politics, the University of Maryland, College Park, where he taught the politics of Africa, and Purdue University, where he taught courses in international relations. At Tuskegee University, Dr. Thiam's courses include international relations, international organizations, and comparative government at the undergraduate and graduate levels. Research interests include democracy and democratic transitions, international relations / foreign policy, sustainable development, and African politics and institutional transformations. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome Dr. Thierno Thiam. Dr. Thierno Thiam.
Thank you, Jalen. And Dr. Earl, thank you for a brilliant presentation. I have taken so many notes that it is quite the challenge to say where to begin. But I'm just going to actually respond to 5 major points you've raised and also put it in context. The topic that you've been given, and also I would like to thank Dr. Warren and Dr. Hart for a topic that could not be any more timelier. We are in a situation effectively where this country is grappling something that in the history of this country it has never grappled with simultaneously. A three-dimensional crisis over race, over health, and over economics. And in this context, of course, giving the American public choices over who they want at the top, at the command, from the top to down ballots, has never been more critical. One could even say more ethical. And this is all the more relevant since all of these crises that we are facing are characterized by the disproportionate toll on the African American community. So ethics is at the center of it. Because politics is ethics. Voting is ethics. Because after all, it is the politics of it that decides health and sickness. It is the politics of it that decides wealth and poverty. It is the politics of it that decides who gets incarcerated and who doesn't. And yes, it is the politics of it that decides life and death. And many of our first speakers have spoken about the syphilis study, which is an acute reminder about giving in a democracy every citizen the right to be a part of it. Therefore, yes, of course, the affirmation of the vote, the cornerstone of this very political system and the foundation of democracy, is not only timely, it is essential. Yet quite often, as we have witnessed, that vote has been denied. And when it's denied, it is often denied on the basis of race. So Dr. Earl's conversation could not come at a better time. And in his comments, in his presentation, he starts by reminding us of the vulnerability of the regular citizen. We are vulnerable because we do not have equal access to knowledge. And in the political scholarship, one book comes to mind, Anthony Downs, An Economic Theory of Democracy, who famously put together what he called a rational theory of democracy and the rational ignorance of the population. Rational ignorance sometimes cultivated and entertained by the scientist. That's why I found his quote about Socrates to be all the more fitting, because when you're looking at really who do we keep who do we leave our destiny with? Who do we let decide on us? We've decided that scientists are more apt to do it than anybody else. And yet quite often we have trusted in them only at our own risks and perils. Hence the need for not only somebody who is sound in terms of their mind, who has that integrity in terms of their thinking, but also who has an integrity in terms of their heart, who has an integrity about the morality of their actions. Therefore, this spoke to me directly. Yes, we are vulnerable. And the 2 points about our vulnerability that he raised so eloquently, first to have to do with the map, and second to do with the limited notion of time and of geography, space and time. Let me just stress one more time about our vulnerability in relationship to the map. I could not agree when he said, I feel in a sense, and I'm just putting words in I'm paraphrasing, that my vulnerability in a sense, as somebody who lives in Georgia, resides in the fact that my vote sinks into a blue block, into the deep blue sea. Well, I can understand that, because as somebody who votes from Alabama, I'm even in a worse position, which is my vote sinks in the deep blue Red Sea. Which brings us to one of the 21st century dilemmas. How do we have an electoral college? What is the morality of an electoral college? An electoral college designed to keep people who look like you and I outside of the process. And in fact, this is the only country on the face of this earth where you could win the majority of the votes and not be president, aside from dictatorships. In no other democracy on the face of this earth can somebody have the majority of the votes and not be president, only in this country, which is an ethical issue that we still probably have to bring to the table to make sure that actually the principle of one person, one vote becomes a reality. Because at this point, my vote doesn't matter. And I say to my colleague, to much of their dismay, that if you are a Democrat and you live in Alabama, your vote essentially doesn't matter because it's not counted. And that needs to be changed. And the other vulnerability that you raised in terms of the limitations of time and geography, and bring in the case of 45. Well, that's one thing we share. We can never say that name. We just refer to him by 45 because he highlighted in a way that no other US president has been able to do, the vulnerability of the system we live in. That democracies, just like in the 60s, they need to be fought for every day. They need to be entertained. They need to be nourished. The minute you give up, you begin to lose it. And maybe if there's silver lining in the deep, dark and black sky that we went through, it is that notion that at least he managed to show us things that were not previously clear in with a plain eye. And again, the geographical limitations. You made a reference to what is known by political scientists as gerrymandering. Again, it is befitting that we are having this conversation on the grounds, on the hallowed grounds, I may say, of Tuskegee, which actually was the subject not only of the syphilis experiment, but one of the most grossly mismanaged gerrymandering experiments in American history that gave rise to what Attorney Gray referred to earlier as Gomillion versus Lightfoot. Meaning essentially, yes, and you concluded beautifully by saying, whenever this democracy was in peril, they had to rely on us to save it. In the 60s, this democracy was in peril. African Americans saved it. They saved it not only in terms of their participation in actually making sure that Montgomery would matter, but also in making sure internationally that freedom would prevail. Again, that started with Tuskegee, because when we look at the Red Tails, their mission, it wasn't just to go and fight and allow America to win World War II. It was also to make sure that democracy prevailed. They allowed democracy to prevail in Europe, and they returned back home to demand that that same ideal for which this country was asking them to give the ultimate sacrifice would also be a notion that would be applicable to this country. And what will become of it, we all know, as basically the Civil Rights Act and also the Voting Rights Act that would consolidate what we know as American democracy. And also, when you mention the idea that yes, we are so limited by time and so limited by space, and by time specifically with the notion of our mortality, I guess you mean it both at the figurative and at the literal sense of the word. Because in either way, when we become vulnerable because of predispositions made in this country, yes, it gives us that notion that we do not live long enough to fight it, and we do not live long enough because also the system is designed not to allow us to live long enough to fight the next fight. I really appreciated your presentation, and I definitely know you are warming up, everybody's warming up, so I look forward to an exciting conversation to follow. Thank you.
Jalen, would you be able to facilitate the questions from the Q&A?
Yes, I can. Have any been asked yet or typed in yet? I don't think we haven't had any questions yet.
No.
Okay. Are there any questions from the panelists that are present right now that they would like to ask to either Dr. Earl or Dr. Thiam?
Or maybe I'm just going to open it because I just cannot help myself. This is to Dr. Earl. So the biggest shock in 2016, and we've seen also the remnants in 2020, is the white evangelical vote aligned with a candidate who doesn't know how to spell ethics. How do you make sense of it?
A good question. I struggle with that one daily, weekly. And you know, the only way I know is one response that I generally give to it is that we have allowed the evangelicals and white evangelicals in this country to give us their Kool-Aid. And Black people have really been, here's where we have been so gullible. You know, for the life of me, how can a highly educated African American, or maybe I shouldn't say highly educated, partly educated African American, how is it that we can follow white leaders as though they are messiahs and give them our monies in church, etc., all of that, the whole 9 yards, and not and see that they are voting against us, while they will say that they don't, you know, they don't advocate being political in the pulpit. You know, they are masking reality, because they are advocating, when they pray for Trump, that means that they are advocating their people to support Trump. When they didn't pray, ignored or failed to pray for Obama, or when they prayed for Obama, I've heard some of them pray this prayer that they are praying against the beast. You know, that revelation kind of code language that, you know, that, or they are praying against the leaders of evil leadership in high places. And how is it that, that Black Americans can sit even in their churches or sit before their TVs and listen to this stuff and not get the message? You know, did we get so intoxicated with God language that that we can't sober up? You know, I mean, many of our ancestors who never finished didn't even go to elementary school. They had enough rabbit sense to hear and understand. When they heard Master saying such certain things, they said, "Wait a minute, you know, we better check this out." They didn't have to have somebody with a Ph.D. or rocket science education to say, "Did you hear that?" Just their intuition helped them to see that, you know, we are being bamboozled. But we are now at a situation where I see young Black college students across this country. And I'm not talking about only Black college students who go to Tuskegee, but across this country who go to these churches and just follow these leaders like they are messiahs. And I've asked some of them, well, why do you do this? And I've had some to say this. Well, they don't talk about politics. They just preach the pure gospel. Well, you know what? Is the pure gospel.
Dr. Earl, I have a question to follow up with you.
Sorry?
I have a question to follow up with you. Could you
Go
please,
ahead.
because you said that how these white evangelical preachers will say they're not political, but yet will talk about, will promote Trump, or they'll have prayers specifically against Obama. Could you talk about how racism and white supremacy and religion has been intertwined within just within the United States, and how that has proliferated till today?
Actually, well, let me make a feeble effort. I'm coming out with a major book on the Jesus crises in Black consciousness, right? And and we were first in sub-Saharan Africa. We were first introduced to Jesus at the start of the genesis of the slave trade. What bothers me is that even at our Black schools, we have not taken seriously the critical reading and studying of and researching of what Christianity and slavery did to us in the Western world. Most of our leadership thinks that it saved us, but it also cursed us with a curse that we have been unable to liberate ourselves from. Now, Dr. Bailey will speak tomorrow, and he's a biblical scholar, Old Testament Hebrew scholar. He helps us to better understand the Hebrew text. But let me raise something that I've become very critical of at this age in my life, after scholarship and working and doing in the academy and writing and publishing. Black schools have suffered greatly in this country. They are probably democracy's greatest treasure. Let me put it that way, okay? And I'm really, the antecedents for my statement here starts with Du Bois, in Souls of Black Folk, and the contribution that we made to this democracy. We have, what I haven't seen, I know we have had to struggle since the civil rights movement. We have had to struggle for monies in a way that, you know, it's been very painful, because that was a white backlash reaction to the civil rights movement to withdraw their monies from a financial support from black schools. We saw it in Nashville, Tennessee, and not only did they withdraw it from Fisk and Tennessee State, but they withdrew their financial support from Meharry, and left Meharry in a terrible strait. And it was all over the country where we had black schools. There are scholars who have written books about this. But in our black educational development, I have not seen black leaders who said that, you know, we have got, our scholars in the humanities have got to better help us understand what happened to us during slavery and with Christianity. And the reason I'm critical of this is there's been no effort to financially support scholarship that publishes and works with these problems. So where do we go to get the answers from them? We go to white schools. And we have turned against and started hating ourselves in our own schools by saying, well, you know, white people, the scholars, our black scholars are at white schools. I was glad to hear Dr. Thiam point out, I listened to his, you know, the reading of his scholarship and the writings and contributions. Because if we don't do it at our own schools, it is, and we have to say, well, we only have, our only scholar is Cornel West or somebody at another white school, and that's not a put down of Cornell. He's, you know, we've known each other for years. If we have to do it there and can't do it at places where we're really at home, then it means that we develop a disdain for home. So that's the challenge that we face, and we have got to hold our leadership accountable to say that, you know, if we can't do it for ourselves, why do we? Who's going to do it for us? And if we can't do it among ourselves, who's going to do it for us?
Excuse me, I have a question for both Dr. Thiam and Dr. Earl. And Dr. Thiam had to pull away a few minutes ago to take care of an emergency. And so I didn't hear the last word. So if it overlapped your last part, so if it overlaps, the question overlaps, please be kind. I'm interested in your perspectives. I know, Dr. Thiam, you said initially that you agree with Dr. Earl's initial assertion of using Plato to make his case. Interested in Plato's denunciation of democracy, or at least his lack of advocacy of democracy, and our tremendous preoccupation with democracy, where we and to the extent that Biden was seen as a socialist or a communist, and so I don't want to talk about communism and socialism, but the socialists. But in terms of democracy, is this the best state of affairs for us or for Black people in terms of the three things that you put out there: race, the perfect storm, right, of race, health? Is democracy the best place for the best system in which to function? So that goes for Dr. Earl and Dr. Thiam. And say something about why Plato wasn't an advocate for democracy.
That is a question. And I will begin by saying again something that he said. even though I don't take them as examples. Plato and more exactly Socrates, what is best for them is actually what is best for Black people, because let us remember that their training was done in Africa among people who were darker than you and me. So that is African, but they were limited in their own essence. Uh, Churchill himself used to say democracy is the best of all, is the best system of government except for all others, meaning as imperfect as it may be, that's what we have. But again, that is where the problem is with human civilization. Uh, Sometimes we're not as bold as we profess to be. For the life of me, I can never understand this part. Whenever human civilization was faced with an existential crisis, we had the bold vision and the intellectual clarity to design a system that would actually, in fact, address that question. The state itself is not sui generis. It was created back in 1648 when nations were in crisis, when an existential crisis was in place, where human civilization decided we were going to create a political and social organization capable of mitigating conflict, capable of making sure that actually human life is preserved. But with democracy, it is as if basically we have decided this is the best we can do. With any other product, we would put an expiration date. But with democracy, we are afraid to put an expiration date. We are even afraid to ask the question, what comes after democracy? What kind of organization do we need to better be able, if you are a Black person who lives in this country or who lives in Africa for that matter, you definitely know the system is not working for you, whether we call it democracy or not. What is the next system? And that's an existential question we have to be ethically and morally in a position to ask, to do better. Because otherwise we will be the generation to have abdicated on our responsibility to do better on what was given to us. But I just want to circle back. I don't want to speak for more than 3 minutes to just, because the first question also was key. And this is where HBCUs matters. And this is where I think like the thinking process can begin in no other place but in HBCUs. Because traditionally, the big, bold thinkers, those who dared to think out of the box, tended to come from the places where we sit. Dr. Earl mentioned Du Bois. He was one such thinker. Even though no human being is complete, no human being is perfect, but at least there were some of those questions that they dared to put. To the point where the HBCU model was the model to save many countries on the face of this earth. Matter of fact, many of you remember a president in Africa, President Johnson, coming to the US and then going back, and then coming to the US, having visited every single place to be visited, from Harvard to the White House to the State Department, he visited them all. But then he visited Tuskegee. When he got back to his own country, Liberia, the question that was asked of him is, what is your takeaway? What's your takeaway from your American visit? He had a clarity of mind. His answer was simple. If I can go back to the United States, pick one institution of higher education, transplant it in Liberia, that would be the dream of my life. Everybody was expecting Harvard. He said that was Tuskegee Institute. That dream would come into fruition because today some of Liberia's elites would be trained in that school called Booker T. Washington Institute, actually, modeled after Tuskegee University, that would train the next generation of leaders of Liberians. But after Liberia, we would say if it was just one, no, it's not just one. South Africa, one of their leaders of the ANC, Alfred Bitini Zuma, who also did his undergraduate studies at Tuskegee, would go back to engineer that school that would come to be known as Fort Hare University. Why is Fort Hare University important? Fort Hare University is the university that was modeled also after Tuskegee University and where Nelson Mandela graduated. So HBCUs have been doing it, not only domestically, but also internationally. And we have to reclaim that vision and that leadership.
Yes, Dr. Hodge, and thank you, Dr. Thiam. But Dr. Hodge, I wasn't so much advocating Plato and Socrates as the model for democracy, by no means. I was I use the example to point out that if you what they said, what Socrates says about knowledge, and who and how not who makes who becomes the kingfish of knowledge. I'm paraphrasing now, but the kingfish of knowledge is the one who makes the others vulnerable, especially in, or at least they're beholding to how knowledge is used to, as whether it's used as virtue or as vice. And Socrates is saying that, as I read it, he's saying that, if you want to know the people who can best use knowledge, I mean, best accomplish vices, criminals, it's the people who who are best trained, the best knowledge, specialized knowledge in the field. So who can put you to sleep forever easily? It's the doctor. If you if you whether of course, and we participate with the doctor in medicine, modern medicine, because of the structure of trustworthiness. We say the doctor has proven him or herself worthy for our to to serve us. But who makes the best thief? The person who owns the banker. So that's why I went to Plato and Socrates. Back to I think uh, Dr. Thiam has made the argument, better probably than I can make it, about in terms of what he says about democracy. We are, and actually, where somebody put up that America is not a democracy. I don't think anybody would say that, in terms of having fulfilled the ideals of democracy. I don't think that would be. It's like Christianity. I used to have students who would say to me when I was a younger professor, who would say, "Well, why are you using this? They're not black, etc." Well, we're not dealing with who's black or white. We're dealing with the ideals. Now, the race and color thing comes in terms of how black people have benefited from the interpretations of the ideals. And generally, black people we are the most vulnerable to the interpretation of ideals because, as the professor has said earlier, the interpretations are used politically to benefit the ma- the masters, the master interpreters. So who interprets democracy for us? Who interprets who interprets medicine for us? Who interprets the scientific knowledge for us? They are the people who we rely upon. And even if we don't rely upon them, it goes back to what I said earlier about how some of our religious practices make us most vulnerable, and to the point almost of self-destruction. Our religion we might say in our religion, well, I don't care what the scientists say. I don't care what the doctor says. Well, that's why we're in this situation with COVID, because 19, because um, there are those who would rely upon their religion and say, well, I'm not afraid of COVID. I'm covered by the blood. Well, what I mean, what do you say to that? Because when somebody is that, and of course, 45 capitalized on that. We never heard him say he was covered by the blood, but but he was. I mean, he manipulated knowledge to the point that, or his ignorance, or we would say his ignorance, to the point that there were other people who said, well, the president said it. So the where we are in this post we're still in postmodernism, right? Yeah, where we are in this postmodern era is we are almost back to where we were in the medieval period. In the pre-modern era, we have reverted back to a kind of superstition and unscientific presuppositions that it's frightening. It is, and here I go back to the categories of time and space in terms of our vulnerability. And Doc, I appreciate your words on this. We feel that we don't have enough, those of us who want to change it, that we don't have enough time. We said, my God, the way people think now, people who didn't go to school, the way so many people think now, let me put it that way. The way so many people think now, people who did not go to school 50 and 100 years ago, you know, they were vulnerable and at the mercies of those who used political knowledge for exploitation. And not only for, but they also used scientific knowledge politically. That's what the syphilis study is about. You use pseudoscience to control the people who have not been exposed to scientific knowledge.
Let me raise a question about time, because I hear both of you talking about we don't have enough time. Now, is that not one of the opportunities being at an HBCU to pass on the value, the knowledge, our experience to the next generation versus saying we have to do it all? So it seemed to me that the notion of passing on to young scholars and infusing in them a commitment to Black people is the opportunity. And I believe we have enough time to do that.
Absolutely. But remember, I said we're speaking of it philosophically. And philosophically means that I get angst about the time I have.
Amen. I got that. I got it. I got it.
Every morning I get up to write a research. I say, my God, this thing is gonna soon be over. And you know, it's the same dilemma that the human being has about relationships.
Yes.
Our spouses will say, you don't give me enough time.
Yes, sir.
You know, you don't spend enough time with me. And they are so right. And at the same time, we get angst about the fact that they're gone.
We don't have enough time.
So, that our children will say to us, they might not be as bold to say it, but even when we try to spend as much time as possible with them, sometimes they learn it better after they get older. You know, it's my oldest son and I have just developed a great relationship of you know, men don't talk as much as generally. Let me put it this way. I mean, not stereotype, but you know, ladies will, you know, they will talk, especially if they got mothers or family. You know, it's nothing for them to talk every day, but sometimes with me as a parent, I get tired of talking. I don't like to talk. I'm trying to think and work this stuff out, you know. And some of you might go through the same thing. Now, I've talked to female scholars who tell me that they face the same dilemmas because they feel that if I don't get this stuff done, if I don't, and as I said to my wife sometimes, baby, if I don't get it, and she supports me, thank God. But if I don't get this on paper, it's going to be too late because,
Yes, sir.
because I saw what happened to my professors.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I thought they were some of the most brilliant people. And then I looked up one day and somebody said, oh no, you know, he has Alzheimer's.
Yes, sir. Yes,
You got to
sir.
know his name.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Yes,
And
sir.
what? And so that's philosophically, and might I say even theologically, but I use philosophical because it includes all mortals. That language of angst includes all mortals. But that's where we are. And you're right, Doc. That's the other thing that I think one of my former students, who's Mr. Jarvis Williams, I think he was on this, but he studied with us at ITC, went on to, we recommended him to Brandeis, and he's writing his dissertation. He honored me by asking me to serve on his committee. His committee, the people asked me, invited me to serve. But and he's writing a brilliant dissertation. My God, it's just awesome. But I feel that, as I say to him sometimes when we have conversations, when I was doing dissertation work, I felt that I didn't have enough time. And I felt that if I got old, I would have the time to just sit and, get it all right. And doggone it, I'm right here, and I still feel that I don't have enough time. So you young people out there who are students, don't waste your time, please.
Yeah. We got old.
We did, didn't we?
Yes, sir.
We did. Don't waste your time. Don't waste your time monkey jiving and overly socializing. Now, socialization is necessary, but when you over socialize, you won't accomplish what Dr. Thiam has accomplished on his resume, and some of the others or what Dr. Gray, Attorney Gray, accomplished. Because I listened to him and I said, my God, this man has been around here a long time. He looks at it and says, this ain't as long as I thought it was. Yes. Because when he when he recalls, and his mind is very agile.
My mind.
I said, my God, listen at the way his mind works. So, but you generally you have to be a good steward of what God has given you. Or if you don't use God, just say nature. But as I used to, my son studied science at Tuskegee, pre-veterinary medicine. And it used to be that he would say to me, well, Daddy, it's when I would say God, he would say, well, that's Mother Nature, science. I said, well, Mother Nature had to have a daddy. But anyway.
All right. So thank you very much. Now, I want to get the questions. And President Spain had to leave to go to class. So I will step in for him. So I want to make sure we get these questions in that persons have asking you all could reflect on this some more. The question I was raising, and somebody's actually was intuiting the question I was asking. So I'm going to read the whole question. Do you think that the idea of a democratic republic is similar to that ideas of kings and queens? We have been at the popular vote. We have seen that the popular vote does not make the decisions. Is it the republic that decides rather than people when it comes to voting? What would a republic refute a democracy? I'm going to ask raise all the questions because we're running out of time. We only have like 4 minutes left, so then y'all could pick and choose which one. Would a republic refute a democracy? The second question is: would someone speak to the complacency versus vulnerability versus democracy? Would someone speak to complacency versus vulnerability versus democracy? That's by Sister Joyce Christian. Someone had a question for Dr. Earl particularly. Dr. Earl, 45's presidency, that's Ms. Sonia had the question. 45's presidency has been likened to a cult-like obsession that attracts followers. What are your thoughts on this? And then the final thing was Kayla Lloyd, and she said, thank you for your wisdom. So Before you all take up this question, because we have 3 minutes left, so make your questions or make it respond to those, make it brief, and then we'll come back on to close it up. So whoever one of you could go first, and then after you wrapped up those questions, just give your closing remarks, and we move to the next person, then we close it out. Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Can go first and be very on the notion of Republican democracy. Yes, I connect with Dr. Earl. Yes, we have to call this a democracy. But when we want to be absolutely technical, I published a piece a few years ago in the International Handbook for Public Management, where I argued that when we go on technical aspect, this could not be called a democracy. Rather, it should be called a constitutional republic. The difference being a democracy is supposed to be a system where you cannot buy your way into the system. Again, 45 showed us in broad daylight what money can do to the system, that we are not there yet. Yes, the people ought to be in charge in a democracy, as Abe Lincoln said, a government of the people, by the people, for the people. But when the people's vote is not counted, when their voice is not heard, when somebody can come buy up those votes or buy the system that will decide who votes, who doesn't vote, then we can argue legitimately we have another system.
Oh, Dr. Cham, quickly, can you either type it in the link, or can you email me personally? I get it out to everyone how we can access that paper, because that sounds like a marvelous work. So if you can send it to us, thank you, we appreciate it. All right, Dr. Earl.
Yes. No, I couldn't hold. Or you to that question or to the next question?
Any question you want to answer, and then close it out.
All right, give me the one that somebody had my name on it when they asked it.
Okay, that one was 45.
You see, I'm exposing my vulnerability.
Okay, is it 45 presidency? 45 presidency has been likened to a cult-like obsession that attracts followers. What are your thoughts on this? In 2 minutes or less.
Yeah. So you ask the impossible, but the reality is that all political figures have cults. They're cultish in their practice. They wouldn't be in the office if they didn't have some, charismatic drawing power. And some can just, do it better than others. But as long as it's virtuous, it's not problematic. It's when the cult leader becomes a dictator or a tyrant is when we get scared of it. But Ronald Reagan he was just a master at cultism, and they loved him. I mean, some people almost worshipped Reagan, and we forget about it. Clinton became cultish with the Black America because he blew that doggone saxophone. And we loved him for that, more than we did his political accomplishments for our self-interest. Go back to Spike Lee, right, about we got bamboozled. But, there's no way to get around it. And I learned that as a young boy, reading the theorists on charisma and power and, how people use power. We only see it as bad when it gets out of hand. But if it's if the leader is using it to benefit the people think he's using, he or she is using it to benefit the whole, that's generally no problem with it. Now I'm doing a lecture series with a presidential historian. Dr. Meacham up at Vanderbilt and I are doing a lecture series. Some of you might have seen it or heard about it. But we're doing a lecture series on the legacies of John Lewis and C.T. Vivian. And both of them had that kind of messianic draw. But they didn't use it to usurp or try and usurp the leadership of Dr. King. Neither one of them did that, and that's amazing. Um, even as country as Baines Johnson was, he had a magnetism in terms of his personality and energy that he was able to do something to get those civil rights bills through in a way that the average, even John F. Kennedy wouldn't have been able to do, because he had the political clout and he used it even in that, that Texas drawl and long whining, drawn out. But the people were attracted to it because they said he's a power. But now, although he went out, on that Vietnam War crisis, that thing got him out of office. But he was still loved because he put this country above his political ambition. He went ahead and resigned because he said he didn't want to sacrifice the country for as big as his ego was, and he had a big ego. But he said, I don't want to see this country torn up because of my position on the war. And anyway, that's good. Thank the person for the question. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, everybody. Let me say these closing words. Cornel West said, somebody asked Cornel West, why doesn't he teach at an HBCU? He taught at Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Union Theological Seminary. Why doesn't he teach at HBCU? And he said, HBCU, that's what make you work too hard for your money. You have to be on all these committees and P6 classes and all of this stuff. And so I said that because I see Dr. Thiam, but we're always just waving at each other. And part of what it means to be an HBCU is that we really have to be intentional about coming together and having think tanks and conversations, because I'm listening to the brilliance and the wisdom of his articulation. And I'm saying, all these times we're waving, we could have been chatting, we could have been adversaries in the fight against oppression and 45. But so we need we really need to make more space, more time for these spaces to take place so that we can have conversations, because the intellectual power is on the campus. We just need to put it together. And so thank you, brother. Thank you very much, my dear brother Thiam, for giving us such gusto today. And then I'm going to be absolutely transparent. I'm in hog heaven, because actually, I don't know if y'all see what I see, but to my left on my screen is Dr. Earl, and to my right is Dr. Warren. So I sit between these two pillars, and the one is my professional mentor, my public health mentor, and Dr. Warren, and we go to blows until. And interestingly, that's what the tension is that will bring about ideas. But we go to blows, and then until we come up with something and say, hey, you know what, this sounds like pragmatic bioethics. I would not have come up with an idea had we not gone to blows. So those things, so I have that on my right. On my left, I have Dr. Earl. That's my pop. I'm telling you, this one, he has worked more than anybody else to shape my mind, and so I appreciate his support. My father went on to glory, and Dr. Earl is the only father I have here in intellectual in Atlanta, and then Dr. Ward is a representative in Tuskegee. So if anybody wants to mess with me, pick your battle. Pick your battle. I want to thank Ashanti Ali Davis, Mr. Ashanti Ali Davis. He came on. He graduated, of course, with his master's in public health this year, and we brought him back on to do exactly what he's doing. And as you can tell by both his questions and his disposition, that he's a true intellectual. He's a warrior. He's trying to get to the best questions. He has the humility to do so, and he has come on to make sure that this presentation is not just what it is in terms of Zoom, but also in terms of YouTube and Facebook. So he's putting that together because he has many gifts. So we just use it. We just suck in the juices out of him while we have him, because we will not have him for long. In a little bit, don't nod, just keep it in a little bit. He's gonna take flight. And I saw Brother Kirksey on, and I'm just so proud that he was on. Brother Jarvis was on. I'm so glad he was on. So just these young brothers and sisters who just continue to stay with us. So we just have much appreciation. And then to Miss Katina Griffin, we just, she's Dr. Warren's executive assistant, and she has really blossomed in just before COVID and in COVID, and in putting this helping with a website and all the stuff and registration and so on. She has done an excellent job. And then behind the scenes we have Miss Geraldine Thomas. She keeps us all in line. she's Mr. Skeegee. Miss Keisha Stewart. She keeps us financially in line. Miss Robin White. She keeps us focused. You don't want to hear what she's going to tell you if you're not focused. Dr. Ebo, she is just one of the sweetest, nicest person ever. She's working on the commemoration side. We have with us Dr. Gwendolyn West. She was online today. She was trying to ask a question. We have my own daughter, Avia Sutton, who is doing the work that Ashanti Ali Davis used to do at the center, into the work with the bridge builders, our young people, and going out there and getting them and being aggressive. And then we have Miss Vantreese Hurd, she's a grant person, and she helps us pull all of this stuff together and try to get stuff together and turn grants in. So we have a team, ladies and gentlemen. Every morning I say, good morning, family. Dr. One will tell you, every morning I send in my message, good morning, family, because that is who we are. We are family, and we are stronger together than we are apart. And I hope I hit every name because I ran through it just now. I thank each and every one of you. Now, tomorrow, we start at 1 o'clock. We're trying to finish on time. We start at 1 o'clock. Yes, Ashanti. Ali.
I can't. Well, I can only speak for myself, but I will say this, is that you said that one day you're not going to have me. Just because I'm not present doesn't mean I'm gone. And I think people—
That's true. That's true.
Amen.
That's true.
Amen.
That's true.
I'm not gone. So
that's true. That's right. So just make sure you write that check. Just send that check back to Mother Tuskegee. One or the other. You're right on that point. I wanted to mention when you all mentioned the white supporters pulled back from these schools. American Baptist College was one of those schools that the white church just totally dropped them completely and said, "Now survive on your own," which was very dirty how they did it. But that same school produced John Lewis, produced a presidential. With a presidential award, C.T. Vivian with a presidential award, Dr. Riggins Earl, Dr. David Hodge, Dr. Brandon Isom, all of us went through that school. So that same school, the little school on the hill, they call it the Holy Hill, that school produced so much. So I say now, so tomorrow we start at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, we'll have Attorney Monica Beamer and Attorney Charlene Bryant. And then we will continue. We end the day with Dr. Randall Bailey. And I will be the last person, actually, because I have to respond to Dr. Bailey. So that's quite a challenge, because you never know what you do know what he's going to say. You don't know what he's going to say, but you don't know exactly how he's going to say, but you know what he's going to say. So, all right, thank you very much, Dr. Bailey. I see that you're on. Blessings upon you. I turn it over now to Dr. Ruben Warren, our leader. Dr. Warren, please give any final words, and then we will close it out. Ashanti Ali, we clear on everything? Ashanti Ali, we clear on everything? Okay, all right. So, Dr. Warren, you said the final word. You have the last words.
This has been an excellent session. The virtual transition has made us bigger and better. And again, the leadership for the PHEI with our colleague, Dr. Hodge, has been phenomenal. And the best is yet to come. So we'll see you tomorrow at 1 o'clock.
Thank you very much. Blessings upon you. Assalamu alaikum. Peace and shalom.